In today's topic, we're going to take a look at risk-taking in entrepreneurial decision-making. With this, we have three central objectives. One is to help you understand entrepreneurs' tendencies to take risk. Secondly, we're going to examine what are some motivations why entrepreneurs engage in risk. And then we're going to take a look at some keys for entrepreneurs to more accurately assess risk and thereby improve their decision-making as they're considering and looking at the probability of desired outcomes. If it's strategic and if it is significant, there's probably some level of risk involved. If something is easy, if the right answer is obvious, there's probably not a lot of risk associated with that on average. So in that way, too, we're looking at things where the outcomes are somewhat perhaps predictable but surely unknown. And in that way, as we've referenced before, risk is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. What I see as risky and what you see as risky may be different. So do entrepreneurs show a higher tendency or preference for risk? We often hear about risk and hear about entrepreneurship in somewhat of the same circle. Do you think that entrepreneurs show a higher natural tendency to take risk?
I don't think that it's only that they show like a higher natural tendency, but they're able to weigh it more than like an average person.
Okay. They may assess it differently than the average person.
Yeah, I was just going to say they look at it differently.
They may look at a scenario or situation differently than others.
They probably encounter more risks than that.
Okay. They may encounter more. But when we look at are entrepreneurs just inherently more risky, what do you think?
It's just more necessary for them to take risks.
It's more necessary if you choose to be an entrepreneur, perhaps, but even at the beginning, when we think about are the people that become entrepreneurs, do they exhibit a higher tendency to take risk?
I mean, isn't becoming an entrepreneur itself taking a risk?
It's taking a risk. It's taking a risk, but when we go through and we look at research and we look at people that are entrepreneurs and people that are not entrepreneurs, there doesn't seem to be a difference in their natural tendency to take risk of one versus the other. What is different, as a couple of you have noted, is that the perception of risk changes. And for some people, the element of let me get hired by the government, let me have a guaranteed job for 30 years, let me sit in this same cube and work with these same people in this same office doing the same thing for 30 years is a safe bet and is attractive. For other people, it's horrifying. Why? Why is that unattractive to others?
Because it's boring.
Sounds fairly monotonous. Sounds fairly boring. Sounds, again, kind of prison-esque for some. So again, same situation, but different perception. And so in that way, what we see is beyond this element of risk, there are other motivating factors for them to start these firms. Elon Musk, we talked about briefly. Elon Musk, again, one of the co-founders of PayPal, lead founder of Tesla, he made about $280 million, I believe it was, when PayPal got acquired. And a few years later, according to the New York Times, 2010, he was broke. How do you go from being a centimillionaire, a 100+ millionaire, to being broke?
He made a poor investment.
He made an investment. The question of poor is arguable at that time, but he essentially took all of his PayPal money and started this car company. And so in that way, he may not necessarily have been without any degree of wealth, but he had a large bank account. But he started buying equipment, buying facilities, buying buildings, hiring people. And car company, not a cheap thing to start. And if you're going to go out and try and get investors, it's tough for me to go to you and say, would you invest in my company? And then if you ask me if I'm putting money in, for me to say, oh, no, I'm not putting my money in. I'll put your money in, but I don't want to invest my own money in this thing. What's that do for your investors?
Makes them think you won't succeed.
Makes them think that, well, if you're not putting much money in, are you really confident? Is it a smart bet? So for him to get the investors interested, he had to put a lot of his own money in as well. So again, at that stage, he put a significant amount, virtually all of his wealth, into Tesla, which in 2010 was still very speculative. Is it going to work? Are people going to buy electric cars? What are some of the downsides or some of the reservations of buying an electric different than a hybrid? So hybrids have an electric motor and a gas motor. An electric only has an electric motor. Yep.
You can't go super far unless the battery dies.
The range is the range. Just as the battery in your phone will die and the battery in your laptop will die, the battery in your car will die. And when it dies, you don't go. You stop where you are. And for a number of vehicles, it's 200 miles or thereabouts. And that way, most of us, if we're going to commute during the day, few of us have a 200-mile commute every day. But you're not driving a few states over and back without having to recharge. So there's a range issue. What else?
There's not many electric stations.
Where do you charge this thing? Now, if you live in the suburbs and you have a garage and you can pull into your garage and you can plug in, not an issue. But that's rare. Most people live in cities. A lot of people live in apartments, condos, townhouses, things of that nature. Where do I charge this thing? Because a plug-in electric is exactly what it sounds like. It's a cable, and I plug that in to an outlet or a wall, and I need access to do that. Yep.
When I lived in Denmark, I knew someone who had one of these cars. I didn't really know them.
Okay.
But they didn't have a garage. They had to park on the street.
Yep.
And they asked for permission to have like a charging thing on the corner of the sidewalk.
Okay.
And it got like really complicated.
Yep. So if you don't have, garage parking, which the majority of people don't, how do you charge this thing? What other issues are there beyond charging? Yep.
Price.
Expensive. Expensive in the context of expensive to manufacture. It's a new technology. The batteries alone in these vehicles may be $20,000 or $30,000. It's a big battery to push a car. Yep.
Because electric cars are kind of new, it's kind of uncertain how well they'll last.
There's an element of battery life. In time, your laptop battery doesn't charge. It will essentially get to the point where it won't recharge. And it's speculative on what that's going to be for a battery in a vehicle. So there are a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of new pieces there. Yep.
Isn't there also the question of the quality of the ride? Because I know a lot of car enthusiasts are sort of against electric because it's not as good.
Okay. There's a question of, well, what's it like? How does it go? How does it accelerate? How does it perform? Is it a golf cart, which is often electric? Or is it a Ferrari, which is what the Teslas are closer to? Because there are no gears. It's not like you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in gears. An electric motor is on or off. And if it's on, it's full throttle. So in that way, again, for this vehicle, it does very well in that regard. But again, the price point, when this was announced, the car behind him, the Roadster, $109,000. So let me start a car company, competing against many existing car companies, doing a new technology at a $100,000 plus price point that needs a plug-in capability that most people don't have for a battery that may die. It's a risky proposition. It's a risky proposition. Now, they've done well of late, and so what you see on the left-hand side is their stock chart. And so they came to market at about $19, I believe it was, when they did their IPO back here. And they've grown 543% in 3 years, with the bulk of that happening in the last several months. What happened? Even if you don't know anything about stocks and financials, what happened?
They launched their new car.
People started buying these cars. People started buying the cars. And if you own 28 million shares of the company that you founded, what's 28 million times 123?
Doesn't seem like it's broke to me.
Well, this is 2013. The article I showed you was 2010. So in 2010, there wasn't much to speak of, and a very speculative product. 3 years later, they're doing pretty well. So what's 28 million times 123? About 3.4 billion. So 280 million is a lot. 3.4 billion is a lot more. And they're not done yet. They're just getting started.
Yeah, they're releasing an SUV crossover.
Yep.
As of closing yesterday.
Yeah.
Yep, July 9th. And last week, so even when the stock is already way up here, he just bought another $100 million of stock in the company. What's that tell you?
He's confident. Confident.
He's very confident in his company.
That it's going to go up. I'm not going to buy $100 million of stock that I think is going to go down. And if I'm the CEO and the founder and the chairman, I should have a good feel for how my company is performing. So in that way, again, did very well with PayPal, reinvested virtually all of it, and 3 years later, it's looking like a success. Again, the story's not over, but this is somebody, again, that likes challenges, that likes to change markets, that has an environmental mindset, wants to bring an alternative to gas-powered vehicles to market, is an enthusiast, likes vehicles, likes cars, likes airplanes. So, again, very different mindset. Yep.
The reason like it sparked and it just jumped was because they made their first ever profit.
Mm-hmm.
All those years they really didn't have, well, they didn't have a profit. And so when they broke through, a lot of like stockholders, they became very confident, and also their car scored very high.
Yeah, they are great cars. It's cool to have a novel car, but a car has to work, and people like them. And we'll talk about them a little bit later as well. So when you look at why do people engage in such risk, one, sometimes we just don't know any better. We engage in risk because we lack some level of information. We're not sure how hard something is. And other elements, we ignore the pieces that we don't want to see. We favor the more positive potential of what it is that we're pursuing. We know the chances of getting into an Ivy League school might be 5%, but we're going to apply anyway. Why do we apply?
Just in case.
Because 5% get in, and we want to be part of that 5%. So in that way, we favor the more possible outcome, oftentimes as entrepreneurs, as we should. So again, in that sense, it gives you an element where if you're going to do something difficult, almost by definition, chances are it's not going to work. but you think that there's a potential that it's going to work, and you think you can be the one to reach that. And so when you think about, well, what kinds of risk do I want to engage in? Again, one element is certainly the significance. How high is the risk? That, again, varies by person. If it's a financial risk, you may think that to put $100 into a risky proposition is doable. For other people, it may not be doable. For other people, like Elon Musk, to put $280 million into a risky proposition is a high risk that most of us would probably not take. If somebody said, here's a check for $280 million, I want you to agree that you're not going to start a company with this, we'd probably take that. But he didn't. He did something different. There's also the element of reward. And so this kind of follows suit with the high risk, high reward, or low risk, low reward mindset. And that if we're going to risk something significant, we're looking for a reward that complements that. There's an element of consequence. And particularly when it comes to starting a company, one central question is, well, what would it take to go back to doing what you were doing before? And if it is something that you can try something, particularly in a part-time way, and if it doesn't work out, you can keep doing what you were doing anyway in the beginning, I would say the consequences are not that high. If, however, you need to sell everything you have, quit your job, then the consequences of being able to recover that, pending the success of the business, are a lot more significant. So again, it's a question of consequences that play in as well. And another key element, naturally, is have you looked at all the factors? Have you thought about all the scenarios that may present themselves and all of the influencing factors that are there? One of the startups that I was involved with, did everybody have this?
Yes.
One of the startups I was involved with is a firm called Cyvalence. And late 90s, there was a big problem with people presenting counterfeit goods online, as well as using the brands of popular companies. And what we mean by that is, it was relatively easy to make these kind of knockoff products. And one way to signal that is if you are able to go to a site and see the images and see the logos of these popular brands. The Nike brands, the Nintendo brands, other apparel brands. And so we had a product whereby large firms would hire us to find instances where their logo was shown online. And in instances where we found that, we would have somebody within our shop take a look at it and see, was this one of their authorized retailers or not? And if not, we'd let them know, and they would take legal action to keep those counterfeit goods and unauthorized distributors from selling their products. How hard is it to do an image search online? How hard is it to find logos online today? Not that hard. We sold this product for $30,000 a year. So why would a company pay us $30,000 a year to find logos online?
Because they don't want to do it.
They may not want to do it, but for 30 grand a year, they could probably hire an intern to do it for half the price.
They're probably losing a lot more than that in sales.
But they could do it themselves, so there's still value in doing it. But why pay us 30 grand for something that today is not hard to do?
Back then it was harder to do.
It's harder to do in 1999. No such thing as Google image search. There were really no reputable or reliable image searching software out there. But one day, we got to work and up on Google with a Google image search. What's that do to your product line? It just went to zero. So in that way, again, particularly in a startup environment, fortunately we had other products that we offered, so that wasn't the only thing we did. But if that was the only thing we did, we were out of business that day because We thought we were clever, but we did not anticipate this element of, well, what happens if the existing search engine companies develop an image search capability? And so, again, it's also thinking about what's in the marketplace, but also what's to come, and what might your competitors do. And so in that way, there's this element of, again, cognition that we keep coming back to, of thinking about what are other people doing, what's changing in the market, what are competitors doing that may be different, and how does that influence the decisions and the risk that I'm interested in taking. And in that way, too, when you begin to think in a more complex way, and when you begin to do more research, what might have led us to anticipate what Google was working on? How do you know what's going to come next for a Google or a big competitor?
Oh, I was going to say the need for this.
Okay, is there a need? So you may find that if you have success with something, if you can make money doing it, other people are going to recognize that. And other people are going to adopt and replicate and improve what it is you're doing. So you don't want to get too comfortable and think that you found something that's going to work and it's going to work forever, because other people are going to enhance and improve that if there's a market for it. What else can you do to learn about what competitors are doing? Yep. You can do research. You can, again, look online, see what people are talking about. You can read news and press, but I would say by the time you're reading about a company on the cover of a magazine, it's probably too late. It's probably common knowledge. So we're interested more so in looking at blogs and looking at the enthusiast websites, going to conferences, talking with people that are kind of in the know about what's going to come and what do they think are going to happen. And it's an element where you're looking for more about, well, what's the rumor? Because by the time it's news, everybody knows that. It's kind of too late to do anything strategically with that. We also want to get multiple perspectives and talk with different people, and that it's not just the same 2 or 3 people within our firm that we're talking to, that we're getting outside opinions, that we're getting multiple perspectives, that we're able to integrate those perspectives and recognize that opinions are opinions, and some people are right, some people are wrong, but we're able to recognize what those are and make our own informed decisions based on that. And that should give us some broader view of what's going on in the market. And what you'll find too, I believe, is that particularly if you're working in anything in a technology space, universities and faculty are a good resource for that as well. So you can see what they think about things. Most people love to talk about their work. Most faculty love to talk about their research. So in that way, universities are a good source as well of finding out what's in the market, what's changing, what's coming, what technologies are people attracted to, what technologies are they getting funding for developing, and what types of projects are they working on as well. So in summary, what we want to recognize is that entrepreneurs inherently aren't more risk-seeking than anyone else. Fundamentally, their tendencies to take risk are influenced instead by their perception, by relative risk, and by the rewards that they perceive, as well as the likelihood that they believe they can cause that change and that can be agents of change in getting the reward. What we also see is that entrepreneurs engage in risk in a unique and variety ways of reasoning. And in that way, what we see with entrepreneurs is that they pursue the risks that are worth it. They pursue the risks that are personally important, and they pursue the goals that are personally important to them. Lastly, we want to stress that it's important to assess risk. And thereby, when you think about risk, when you calculate the risk, you can make smarter decisions, be more effective in your entrepreneurial decision making.